and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I am your host, Catherine Hadro, in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, Planned Parenthood releases its latest annual report. We have expert analysis from a pro-life panel. Teen Vogue works with pro-abortion groups to compile a list of abortion stories. We speak out. And this.
We have this radical view as believers that every life, without condition, is a gift from God. It must be valued and cherished and protected.
We introduce you to a Catholic priest on a mission to educate the faithful about difficult end-of-life questions. But first, our top story, a Texas appeals court has ruled a children's hospital must continue medical care for a terminally ill 11-month-old girl for now. The baby girl, Tinslee Lewis, reportedly has a congenital heart defect, chronic lung disease, and high blood pressure. She's been on a ventilator since July and requires cardiac support, painkillers, sedation, and medical paralysis. Tinslee has been at Cook Children's Medical Center since her premature birth, and now the hospital wants to remove the 11-month-old's medical care. The family objects. Tinslee's mother even told reporters her daughter is awake most of the time when they are together. A lower court judge ruled medical interventions could be stopped, but in early January, the Second Court of Appeals of Texas granted Tinslee emergency relief, ordering that her treatment continue until an appeal is considered. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton released a joint statement on the case, saying, in part, the case of Tinslee Lewis is complex and heartbreaking, and the state will continue to support Ms. Lewis's exhaustion of all legal options to ensure that Tinslee is given every chance at life. Joining us now in studio to discuss this case is Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks for having me on.
The medical care of this baby is in the hands of the court right now. As Texas's top lawyer, what are your thoughts on this case?
So it's very sad. It is a heartbreaking story. It's a mother trying to save her child, and it's sad that we're in a situation where potentially a hospital is ending the life of a child without the mother's consent.
Can you explain for us what is Texas's 10-day rule and how is that impacting Tinslee's case?
So it's having a dramatic impact. It allows hospitals to basically determine through their ethics committee that they're no longer going to treat, and they give 10 days for the parent to find either another place to treat or for court intervention, and if that doesn't occur, they stop life-sustaining treatment.
Does this law offer any protections for children like Tinslee?
So, I mean, the only real protection that it offers, once a hospital decides that they're not going to treat, the only protection it offers is the 10 days. Now, we would argue that this statute is unconstitutional. My job is to defend state statutes, but the ones we don't defend are the ones we believe are unconstitutional because that's a higher calling for us than a state statute.
What are the next steps here? What are the next steps for the Lewis family? You know, what are their legal options?
So fortunately, the Court of Appeals that is being appealed to and that we've sent a letter to has put a stay. So I mean, they've stopped the hospital from pulling life support. So until they make the decision as to whether the hospital has the ability to take this child off of life support, the child will remain on life support.
I know that you released a joint statement with Texas Governor Greg Abbott on this case. Are there any steps that you two can take specifically to protect Tinslee?
So one, we speak out, which we've done. Two is we have joined the legal action by asking the court to allow this child to live and let the parents make that decision as to whether they want to continue treatment.
Thank you for speaking out, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us about this important case.
Well, this is a very important case to me. It's a very important case to our citizens. If you can't protect life, what can you protect?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General.
Thanks.
Bishop Michael Olson of Fort Worth, Texas, has offered to assist the Lewis family. In a statement released earlier this month, Bishop Olson said, healthcare decisions involving the vulnerable and severely ill are best made in the patient's interests by family and healthcare providers and not by judges, politicians, or lobbyists. The diocesan statement continues, Bishop Olson is offering to consult with baby Tinslee's family and appropriate Texas Catholic healthcare facilities. We continue this conversation now with Katey Price, Communications Director for the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Katey, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for having me.
First off, I want to get any reaction or response that you have to what Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton just told us about this case.
Sure thing. We're just really happy that we have such a strong advocate for Tinslee and for our mother Trinity in this terrible, terrible time of need for the family.
Absolutely. Katey, can you explain how does the Tinslee Lewis case, this heartbreaking case, compare to other cases we've seen abroad in the UK, like Alfie Evans and Charlie Gard? Are there comparisons there?
Sure. In both cases, and actually in all three cases, we have fetal abnormalities involved. And so we have these difficult decisions that are being made by hospitals, administrators, doctors, and not by the family. And here we have Trinity Lewis, and she's just fighting to give her daughter a chance. And what she's saying is, look, you know, no institution knows better than I do how to care for and how to provide for my daughter.
We hit on it a little bit with Attorney General Ken Paxton, but can you tell us more about Texas's 10-day rule? Is there any additional legislation that could provide more protection for patients like Tinslee?
Sure, and I wish there was more legislation that could help someone like Tinslee. What we have in Texas is we see there's this 10-day rule, this law that says, you know, a doctor, if a doctor believes that a patient's life-sustaining care should be stopped and a hospital committee agrees, then you have 10 days in which that family can find a new hospital, some alternative care to take that patient. Otherwise, the care is going to be stopped. So, you know, Texas is just one of a very small handful of states that has such a law on the books, and it's really tragic and it's hard when you have a bad, unconstitutional law infringing on a patient's right to live.
The Charlotte Lozier Institute works to protect life on a number of fronts, including patients who are medically vulnerable like Tinslee. Can you tell us more about those specific efforts?
Yeah, definitely. So we have 60 associate scholars who are researching cases just like this. And what we essentially see in a case like that of Tinslee Lewis is, look, this is a very slippery slope. And we have both lawyers and researchers as well as medical doctors saying, wow, you look at a case like this, it's a slippery slope. So if it's one day it's someone with a severe fetal abnormality like Tinslee Lewis, another day it's Down syndrome. And so where does it stop? In between, it's a very, very tricky condition. It's a slippery slope.
Finally, Katey, you know, we're talking about this little girl, Tinslee Lewis, and no doubt that she is suffering. She has a heart defect, she has lung disease. But Katey, can you speak to why her life, even though there is that suffering, her life is still worth fighting for?
Sure. I mean, she is just like you and I here. She was fearfully and wonderfully made by a creator who loves her. And so her life is worth living. And then also just what do, you know, I ask your audience, what do we say to ourselves as a society? What does this say about us? It should prick the conscience of every American to think, you know, this is a vulnerable little girl, and this is just a family who wants to love her and who says she has a right to live. Who is the state? Who are we to say that she doesn't have that right?
Beautifully said. Katey Price, Communications Director for the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine.
When it comes to respect for human life for the medically vulnerable, here's what the Catholic Catechism states. Discontinuing medical procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate to the expected outcome can be legitimate. It is the refusal of overzealous treatment. Here, one does not will to cause death. One's inability to impede it is merely accepted. The decisions should be made by the patient if he is competent and able, or if not, by those legally entitled to act for the patient, whose reasonable will and legitimate interests must always be respected. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith recently introduced the Senate version of the Save Moms and Babies Act. It's new legislation to prevent the FDA from approving new chemical abortion drugs. It would also put an end to labeling changes for existing drugs and would stop abortionists from dispensing these drugs remotely. If made into law, this bill would stop the expansion of chemical abortions, which we know are on the rise today. This Save Moms and Babies Act is a common sense bill that would protect both women and unborn children. And that brings us to this week's call to action. Tell your senator to co-sponsor the Save Moms and Babies Act. And here's how you can get your message straight to your lawmaker. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com. Once you get to this website, you will be able to type in your basic information so we can tailor this message for your specific lawmaker and send it straight to them. Again, the Save Moms and Babies Act would stop the expansion of chemical abortions. We recently saw the overall abortion rate is going down, but chemical abortions by abortion pills are on the rise. Not only are these abortions dangerous for the unborn baby, but for the mother as well. That is why pro-lifers want to see this pro-life Save Moms and Babies Act made into law. Tell your senator to become a co-sponsor of this pro-life bill, which would increase its chance for success by going to prolifeweekly.com. Turning now to our next segment, Planned Parenthood quietly released their latest annual report last week, revealing a new record for abortions in a single year. Let's take a look at some of those numbers. During the 2018 to 2019 reporting year, Planned Parenthood committed 345,672 abortions. That is an increase of nearly 13,000 abortions from the previous year. That means Planned Parenthood committed nearly 81 abortions for every one adoption referral. And regarding breast exams and Pap tests, Planned Parenthood services dropped by nearly 50,000 since the previous year. To break this all down, we are joined now by Dr. Charmaine Yoest, the Vice President of the Institute for Family, Community, and Opportunity at the Heritage Foundation, and Ashe Schow, Senior Editor for the Daily Wire. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Charmaine, looking at this report, what was your biggest takeaway?
Do you know, Catherine, every year they come out with this report right at the beginning of the year and they kind of try to bury it in all the hoopla around New Year's. But the one thing that always comes across is that Planned Parenthood is Abortion, Inc. And the most stunning figure to come out of this year's report is the fact that they hit their all-time high in the number of abortions that they performed. Over 360,000 abortions in 1 year. It's absolutely stunning. But more than that, in terms of if you look at the fuller picture, they also saw fewer patients. So at the same time that their number of abortions is going up, they're seeing fewer women. And so they're consolidating their abortion business. And in the context of talking about how they're positioning themselves in terms of federal funding, it's really important to know that they're consolidating their abortion business.
That is devastating. Looking at the report, were there other figures that jumped out at either one of you?
Yeah, absolutely. As abortions went up, I mean, they increased by more than 3% over last year, which itself was an increase of about 3.5% over the year earlier. As abortions go up for Planned Parenthood, all of their other services that they like to point to saying, no, we're not just abortion, have gone down. I mean, if you look at them, you've got contraception down 2%, pap smears and tests down 7%, breast exams down 11%, cancer screenings down 8%, prenatal care down 68% since 2010. And to put that in perspective, for last year, Planned Parenthood killed 35 babies for every one woman it helped with prenatal care. And adoption referrals as well, down year over year. And again, killed 80 babies for every one adoption referral.
The numbers are striking, and yet not mentioned in the report was the tumultuous year within Planned Parenthood's own leadership. But what should our viewers know?
So the last president was Dr. Leanna Wen. She was the first doctor to kind of run the organization in about 50 years, considering it's women's health. She was let go because, as she said in her own words, I wanted to emphasize total women's health. They wanted to double down on abortion rights. So she was trying to get to the organization to actually focus on women's health and other things. She tried talking to pro-life groups and people who weren't necessarily for abortion but didn't like government intrusion in medical health. She wanted more services for maybe mental health and addiction, but within Planned Parenthood, it was just, no, abortion's our thing. We're sticking to it.
But here's the thing. You know, Planned Parenthood wants to talk about their other services that they allegedly provide and that they're, focused on women's health. But the Trump administration came out this year and said that there had to be a physical separation between family planning services and abortion. And Planned Parenthood threw a temper tantrum and said, oh no, we can't do that. We're not going to take the federal funding. But hidden in this report is the actual fact that despite the fact that headlines were screaming that Planned Parenthood was losing money, in actual fact, we're still giving them over $500 million in federal funding. The money went up. So you know, people have to really kind of look behind the screaming headlines about how Planned Parenthood is caring about women's health and how they're not getting any federal funding. The truth is actually quite the opposite.
I'm so glad you brought that up, how Planned Parenthood opted to no longer comply with the Title X program. Did this affect their bottom line? What do we know when it comes to the dollars they saw?
Well, as I said, people keep this number in mind. Over $500 million annually in federal funding that's coming from Americans' taxpayers. And what's interesting about that to me is that when you look at polling data on abortion across America, if there's one thing that Americans do agree on, it's that they don't want to see their tax dollars going to abortion. And yet when Planned Parenthood was confronted with the choice of take these tax dollars and comply with federal law that says tax dollars cannot go for abortion, they said, sorry, see you, we're not interested.
We saw a report recently that the overall abortion rate in the United States is going down, and yet, as we've mentioned in this discussion, abortions at Planned Parenthood are only going up. What does that tell us truly about their abortion business?
That they're really wanting to corner the market on it, and that they are. I mean, that's where people know. They know Planned Parenthood for abortion. So again, whatever they want to say about what other services, people know if I need an abortion, I can go to Planned Parenthood. And it says a whole lot about the culture. I mean, you've got Democrats and progressives just constantly. Just recently at the Golden Globes, you had a pregnant Michelle Williams saying the only reason she was able to accept this award was because she had aborted a child. I mean, you've got this constant messaging to women that if they have a child, their life is over and they can never succeed. And it's working. It's clearly working. Abortions are going up, even though polls show Americans don't agree with abortion. I mean, by and large, Americans want it at least limited to just the first trimester. And yet you've got all of this messaging that you should have an abortion in order to succeed in life.
We need to continue to speak the truth about life and really bring the light into that darkness. One thing that really stood out to me in this report is Planned Parenthood's mention of their online outreach and an increase in online made appointments. Do we anticipate this to be a growing part of their business? What should we in the pro-life movement be paying attention to here?
Let me pick up on the word business, going back to Abortion Inc. Planned Parenthood, the reason that they're as effective as they are in the abortion arena is that they do approach it as a business. They have a strategic plan. We know from our friends who've come out of Planned Parenthood that they're very strategic, that they have goals, they have quotas, and they're very effective at looking at trying to use online outreach. They're consolidating in urban areas. They're targeting lesser privileged communities. They're targeting college communities, all of these places that where women feel vulnerable and exposed and perhaps don't have as much support as they'd like to have.
And they've really jumped on the mobile apps. I mean, they were bragging in their report that they had about 1.6 million online bookings, 78% of which were booked on mobile, and that's up from 1.34 million last year and 73% booked online. Whereas what are the pro-life, the adoption centers, the crisis centers? I mean, do they have these same services, and are they as good at marketing them and advertising? Hey, you know what? You can reach us online too, because that's what's really going to need to happen. Is the pro-life community is going to have to keep up with and then overtake Planned Parenthood at their own game.
Well, I have to say I'm optimistic about this. I'm excited about where the response that the pro-life community is having to these kinds of cutting-edge challenges. And we have the March for Life coming up in a week, and you know, young people coming from all across the country and groups coming together to strategize to say that we're still here. I think there's an optimism in the pro-life community, a dynamism and an upward swing. And so despite the fact that Planned Parenthood continues to push the envelope in terms of being a business, I think that the pro-life community is more than capable of stepping up and continuing real cutting-edge outreach. You know, we all know some of these groups that are doing tremendous work and that we're proud to partner with.
And I think that optimism will shine on the DC streets next week. Charmaine, Ashe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back,
certain questions kept coming up, or context for answers kept being misunderstood. Why does the church do this? Why can't we do this?
We introduce you to a pastor on a mission to educate Catholics on church teaching about end-of-life care. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm your host, Catherine Hadro. Teen Vogue worked with pro-abortion groups to compile a list of abortion stories. That is this week's Speak Out segment. Teen Vogue published 39 pro-abortion stories this month. The author admitted she worked with the pro-abortion groups Shout Your Abortion and Advocates for Youth to find these stories. One woman interviewed went so far to say, quote, "Abortion is freedom. I am happy, whole, and alive because of safe abortion." These 39 abortion stories were in response to the 39 senators who recently signed an amicus brief asking the Supreme Court to reconsider Roe v. Wade, the 1973 Supreme Court decision legalizing abortion nationwide. Scrolling through abortion story after abortion story in this Teen Vogue piece is one gut punch after another. These stories are not stories of freedom and women empowerment, but cases of isolated suffering in which women fell victim to the abortion industry's lies and empty promises. There was one case of a woman describing her abortion, but based on the details, it sounds like it was actually a common procedure to remove her miscarried baby. That is not an abortion story. There was a case of a woman who said she went to Planned Parenthood at age 14 to get an abortion after being sexually abused. Why didn't Planned Parenthood look into this case to intervene to stop further abuse? And is Teen Vogue really so desperate to publish abortion stories they really grabbed onto that one thinking it painted the procedure in a good light? Our world is so confused. And while Teen Vogue is free to run pro-abortion propaganda, no amount of sugarcoating or mental gymnastics can change the stark reality of abortion. Killing a human child can never make you happy, healthy, or whole. At the March for Life here in Washington, D.C. next week, some women and men will gather on the steps of the Supreme Court to share why they regret their abortion. I hope Teen Vogue will consider sharing their stories as well. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com to tell your senator to co-sponsor the Save Moms and Babies Act. No one wants to think about the death of a loved one or the complex moral decisions surrounding their end-of-life medical care. But one Catholic priest is on a mission to help the faithful navigate these difficult moments with the wisdom of church teaching. Here's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
Hello, my name is Father Geoffrey Kirby. I'm a moral theologian, but more importantly, a pastor of souls.
Father Geoffrey Kirby is pastor of Our Lady of Grace Parish in Indianland, South Carolina. It's where he says he's often called upon to help his parishioners navigate difficult end-of-life questions.
And of course, being a pastor, there's all the real pastoral circumstances. I have an older demographic, so a lot of questions about end of life, advanced directives, a lot of questions of that sort.
Kirby noticed his parishioners often asked the same questions about end-of-life care.
Certain questions kept coming up, or context for answers kept being misunderstood. Like, why does the church do this? Why can't we do this?
Kirby, who is also a moral theologian, professor, and award-winning writer, says he felt called to make sure Catholics are equipped to answer these difficult questions. So he wrote the new book, We Are the Lord's, a Catholic guide to difficult end-of-life questions.
So eventually I said, there just needs to be a generally accessible, easy to read. I want to stress easy to read. Someone can pick this up and say, I understand this, right? I got this, right?
In less than 100 pages, Kirby examines topics like redemptive suffering, discerning between obligatory and optional medical treatments, and what death with dignity really means.
So the book really was born from a real pastoral effort to allow these teachings on end of life to be understood and to be fully understood in terms of the church's context and the gospel and how we understand life.
Kirby also utilizes social media to share these teachings, answering common questions in short YouTube videos.
In order to make any moral decision, we need more information. If something is ordinary care, then we have to accept it. If something is extraordinary care, then we have the moral option of accepting or declining.
Whether in print or online, Kirby says he wants Catholics to understand the Church's teaching that each and every human life has value from conception to natural death.
There's a beautiful consistency, so why we oppose abortion, to our teachings on contraception, to end-of-life care, there's a beautiful consistency that we have this radical view as believers that every life, without condition, is a gift from God. It must be valued and cherished and protected.
Father Kirby wants the lessons in these pages to be a reminder that the end of our lives have just as much human dignity in them as they do in the beginning.
I really think that so much of our efforts, understandably, necessarily, has been at the beginning of life. But because of that, I think we've been caught off guard by the vehement attack on life at the end. And because of that, we're behind the power curve. So I think that our pro-life efforts now have to begin to realize that we have to fight on two fronts.
A fight Father Kirby hopes his brother priests will take up as well.
I would call on church leaders as well. I think that the local priests and bishops have to be more adamant, in my opinion, in terms of the pro-life stance, and more generous. We have to do more. This is our fight. As Christians, we claim every human life has value. We have to put more energy and more time and more money to this effort.
And that does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.